as host country, how are you finding the proceedings of the conference so far?
Morocco is honored to host this African conference, ministers of finance, of planification and of development, and it is the first time that we host this conference, which will be focused on many subjects concerning political finance policy and private sector, trade, and Morocco accord a great importance for these thematics because of importance that we accord to Africa, to the continent of Africa, and especially the youth in Africa. And the experts have worked for three days, and now the ministerial conference will focus on all these important thematics, knowing that Morocco, with the clairvoyance of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, accord a great importance to the integration of Africa, to the development of Africa.
So let's talk about that integration, because I've attended a couple of sessions, and Morocco has numerous times been listed as possibly being the 22nd country to ratify the AFCFTA.
Le Maroc a signé l'accord pour la
Morocco has signed the agreement of free trade of the continent. This agreement was adopted by the government, and it is now in a process of ratification, and I think that it is just a matter of time that it will be adopted definitely, and there is many opportunities in the application, the implementation of this agreement, and we think that it will be a vehicle, a great vehicle for creating wealth and creating value, and also creating jobs for the youth of Africa.
Et qui a besoin évidemment de créer également des opportunités d'emploi pour sa jeunesse nombreuse.
Minister, thanks so much for your time. So the 2019 economic report has just been launched. Can you just briefly paint a picture of what that looks like for our viewers?
Thank you very much. I think what it looks like is positive news, in the sense that all the data that has been collected, the evidence and the advice that we have is that how do we better our tax collection? How do we make sure that the loopholes that have been haunting us for a long time, how can we do it to reduce these loopholes? How do we do as a continent to really change the game in terms of what has been recorded is digitalization. What has been recorded is the Africa Continental Free Trade Zone. These are two things that has been very much recorded over and over. I think this good job that the ECA did is a quality document that shouldn't gather dust. I think it is something that our researchers should be able to take on and be able to look at what is there as a prescription and a guide to really move forward. I think what has been recorded is really efforts to focus more on the domestic resource mobilization. I think the message has been that if you don't do your own homework, how can you go outside to convince to be able to access those funds?
Deputy Minister, thanks so much for your time. Now, yours is a very interesting comment that you made. I come from a country whereby the president is trying to get the private sector to invest more. And one of their complaints is that the corporate tax rate is way too high. But you say that reducing taxes, particularly for business, won't necessarily mean increased investments. Can you tell me why?
Yeah, sure. The thing that this is like a common understanding between lots of countries, that if you reduce taxes, you're going to have a significant increase in investment. However, I have to say that this is not only my statement, this is a statement that was documented in the report, the economic report of Africa that is produced by ECA. The idea is quite simple, that there are lots of determinants for investment. Yes, part of it is taxes, but it is not the most important thing. And by reducing taxes to a very minimal, their effect on investment is going to be insignificant. So the most important thing is the country itself, the fundamentals of the country, in terms of their growth potential, in terms of their macroeconomic stability, in terms of the tax administration. So, as I said in my intervention, it's maybe the rate, it is important, but the more important is the tax administration, is the way of collecting taxes. If it is easy, if it is simple, then this will have a very positive effect on investment.
How do you see the CFTA being a catalyst for that vision? And also, I mean, at this conference, we've heard so much about the importance of private sector involvement, but also the fact that, you know, tax holidays or tax breaks don't necessarily mean more private sector participation.
CFTA will enable us to compete better in the Africa market, and it will enable us to attract many more investment into the country. And it will also streamline and regularize a lot of different packages within Africa in terms of incentives. So it's a comprehensive package which we have to work towards. And definitely it will help us in navigating the productivity gains by attracting many more investment into Ethiopia. We have big market by ourselves, but the bigger Africa market is also much bigger advantage. We are at the forefront of Africa's aviation. And Ethiopian Airline has been very successful in connecting Africa together and also connecting Africa with the rest of the world. That's why through the success of Ethiopian Airline, Addis Ababa becomes a major hub. As a government also, we invested a lot on airport infrastructure, not only in Addis Ababa as a major airport hub, but also in a lot of places within the country. Domestic resource mobilization is fundamental on sustainably financing infrastructure and other development services. And in the past, we have been addressing this issue. We started to mobilize more domestic resource mobilization in the past years. We also take debt, concessional as well as also commercial, for key infrastructure projects. Most of the debts that we accumulated over the past is invested on key productive sector in the economy that will build our competitive advantage and help us to boost our growth, production, as well as also export capabilities.
Of course, when we talk about the continent, we always bring all the countries together. When we talk about average growth rates, which we're now talking about, we talk about 3.2% overall for Africa, with possibility of going to maybe 3.5 by the end of the year 2020. We would like much better, but clearly what ends up happening, Nigeria used to grow at 7%, and Nigeria used to pull the rest of the economy together. For the 10 years between 2000 and 2012, when Africa was growing at 6-7%, we always used to say without South Africa, because when you added the average growth of South Africa, it took that number down. However, I think 2 or 3 things are happening in our largest growing economies. One of them is South Africa has signed the CFTA. And the whole point of the CFTA is to say that we want to create regional value chains which will allow for not just one country to pull the growth, but sub-regions, and why not the whole continent. And so we really believe that part of how we get to double-digit growth, we need double-digit growth to be able to get the investments that we need to pull the economy. And most importantly, I think when we talk about growth, we really want to talk about, you know, growth per capita. How much more resources is each person earning? How much more access does each person have? How much more opportunity do we create? And I think with the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we realize that this will just give a lot more people a lot more opportunity, a lot more value addition, and a lot more work.
To
the degree that migration is caused by a lack of good governance in some African countries, I'd just like to get the panel's comment on the practical steps that you plan on taking to ensure good governance in some African economies, to boost these economies and indeed stop migration.
I would say that we need to talk about both sides of the coin. Bad governance, the abuse of power and accountability and checks and balances that are needed for leadership at all levels so that they take those responsibilities really very seriously. Corruption. I mean, corruption, we also need to see stronger processes in procurement, in the way and manner in which we include people in governance, and not to see that, again, abuse of power. It is a result of that, and it is taking huge amounts of resources away. And we see the discussion on illicit flows, where we had a very clear example from the Abeki report, recommendations to see how we address that. Now, in all of these cases of bad governance, it's a universal issue. In Africa, we have to take that, and I do believe the African Union has taken that on board. I know that there is the president of Nigeria, for instance, took up the chairship where we discussed corruption and how to bring an end to that. So I think the bad governance is receiving a lot of attention, but we need to make sure that we keep the pressure on, because it costs us. It costs us in lives, it costs us in the resources that could otherwise go to grow our economies. On the other side of it is a weak governance. And in weak governance, we're talking about institutions and the capacities that are needed actually to carry out many of the services and rights, and ensuring that people are included. That is something that the United Nations and the African Union are working towards with many capacity building initiatives, so that we can strengthen those institutions that would deliver service. So big issue, many asks, recommendations. Fora like this give us an opportunity to stock take. And I think that's where I mean the actions that you take out of a regional coordinating mechanism should be to address these in very tangible ways. What are the partnerships we need to take out? What are the messages back to leaders that we need to follow through on? How can we ensure that civil society is given the space and the voice to continue advocating for this? How do we strengthen democracies? Because in a democracy, you've got the three arms of government, you've got the checks and balances. But if any one of them is weak, we fail. You can have the best executive in the world, but if you've got a weak judiciary and you've got an incredibly weak parliament, then you're not going to get very far with the best leader in the world. And both, there is a balance that needs to be kept, and we need to strengthen as we go looking for stronger institutions.